The following is a public preview of the New Models podcast. For our complete library, visit patreon.com/newmodels or newmodels.substack.com.
New Models Talkcore.
It's talk, but it's also core.
Blah, blah, blah.
It seems everyone is talking about Talkcore.
Would you like more Talkcore?
It's Talkcore from New Models.
Welcome to New Models Talkcore. I'm Carly Busta. Today we are joined by New Models correspondent Gideon Jacobs. Based in New York, Gideon is a writer and actor with recent bylines in the LA Review of Books, The New Yorker, Heavy Traffic, and Document Magazine, among other outlets. When we last spoke to Gideon, which was this past spring, he had just filed a piece that gave a very useful media theoretical explanation for the erstwhile unlikely pairing of Elon and Trump, reading the current US president in his obsession with the spotlight and Marvel-style hero-dom as the main character in a gaming space where Elon, believer of simulation theory, is the ultimate player one. A few months earlier, Gideon came on the show with a likewise useful media theoretical reading, unpacking the Trump campaign's relationship to images and authenticity. In his framing, Gideon saw a left concerned with truthful portrayals of established fact, even while the right was busy enthusiastically generating, both via AI and by physically staging, images that supported what people wanted to see, wanted to be true, and in doing so, effectively prompting reality. Every time Gideon joins us, the subject matter is nominally political. However, Gideon is not a political pundit. In fact, he's trained as a professional actor. Don't miss his current one-man performance, Images, a Show, which debuted at Earth in New York City earlier this year and will likely be staged again in the coming months. This time, Gideon comes on New Models in the wake of the assassination of American Christian nationalist Charlie Kirk, which, in our assessment, was not actually a political assassination. I'm Carly Busta, my co-host is Little Internet, and we are speaking today with Gideon Jacobs. Let's get into it.
We're here once again with the writer Gideon Jacobs on New Models. We've spoken to Gideon before about the more surreal events that have happened in recent years. Trump at McDonald's, Elon's Ketaphysics. I just made that one up. Thank you very much. Trump's brush with death and the truly cinematic fight, fight, fight moment. And now we're speaking with Gideon following the assassination of conservative Christian nationalist activist Charlie Kirk. So we invited Gideon to speak about an era where language and symbols seem to be agentic. In other words, an era where magic has returned, and this conversation begins with an Etsy curse. Welcome, Gideon Jacobs.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe you can.
Yeah, no, it's good to be back. This conversation began because I sent you the Jezebel article that came out a few days before Charlie Kirk was killed, where some Jezebel writer wrote an article about having cursed or hired witches on Etsy to curse Charlie Kirk.
Slowly, over the course of the coming months, the circumference of Kirk's head will increase inch by inch until he becomes a literal human bobblehead. Or maybe it keeps growing until it eventually pops. Either way, it feels appropriate. In witches we trust. So did my Etsy curses work? Well, time will tell.
That's 2 days before. Yeah. Julian, last time we brought up magic when I was on, you were like, I'm not prepared to go down this road. But I'm curious if you are a little bit more now.
Yes, I'm prepared.
Okay, yeah. I mean, one of the ways in which I like to view the weirdness of reality and it exhibiting uncanny negentropy as opposed to entropy, like more order, more strange synchronicity, more things that make it watchable. Like we've discussed this idea of image at scale as a metaphysical force.
Actually, maybe you should articulate that framework a bit more
actually,
because
that's brilliant.
it's really...
And the full line is really good. I have to pull up your Instagram to get the full line. Okay, hold on. Yeah. After reality delivered Donald J. Trump's perfect bloody ear image, I got curious about quantum physics. Roughly, before measurement, matter exists in all possible states at once, according to its wave function. Then, once observed or measured, the wave function collapses and matter chooses a definite classical state. In our current world of many more cameras than people, nearly every inch surveilled and or measured, it feels as if reality is beginning to obey rules of image story. Like it does laws of physics, optimizing for qualities that make it more watchable, aka entertaining. That is, maybe if reality is behaving like reality TV, exhibiting less of the je ne sais quoi entropy that makes it feel like real life and exhibiting more negentropy, resulting in the kind of uncanny order, meaning, and drama we associate with what's scripted, it's because story image at scale is a metaphysical force, capable of applying actual pressure on superpositional clouds of possibilities. In short, can new heights of observation affect the wave function's collapse? I would love to talk to a physicist about this. I am an amateur, God bless. That was a great, that's really great.
I mean, that was, we talk about the weirdness of like why everything feels weird. And was sort of like an armchair way of looking at the feeling. And something we talked about last time I was on was when reality stops exhibiting that entropy that we associate with, oh, well, that's real life. It's not a story. Or that's when we tend to start trying to explain synchronicity and strangeness with conspiracy. We start to stretch things. And I think I was looking for another way to explain that weirdness. And what felt most different now just the sheer ubiquity of cameras, the sheer ubiquity of
measurement.
Quantification in
exactly.
general,
Images at scale, it's a metaphysical force. Like another thing in the bad Jezebel vibes article is one of the witches uses an image of Charlie and burns it as part of a ritual. And last time I was on the show, we started to talk about the right strangely becoming the home of magic and counterculture in the West, which is bizarre. I feel like we're in the 1960s again, but without any of the tenets of hippiedom that made it sort of potentially warm and loving. We're like in the far right's 1960s.
I mean, I also think it doesn't matter if your theory of physics, in this case, the quantum state collapsing from all of this observation at scale, it doesn't really matter if that's true or not. I think we're in a time where complexity has exceeded the size of the container that like truth as understood by humans can hold. And in a way, it's going to take really elastic, unorthodox use of language to allow us to really understand how things are operating right now. Because everyone feels the bounds of our capability for understanding or articulating it with the language we have.
Have either of you ever been to CERN in Geneva, where they're the Large Hadron Collider, and how they started with a pretty small circle and then they made it larger and they made it even larger, and they have to like keep on making it larger with the hope that if they make it large enough, they can reach a speed that they can then observe different particles. And if you ever fly over Geneva, you can see roughly the area because they can't build buildings over it because they have this very important experiment going on underground.
I wonder if this is sort of what you're getting at, Carly, in some ways. Like, in order to process reality, we break it into pieces and then break it into more pieces and then break it into more pieces and more pieces. And once we get really fractured, it starts to become unrecognizable and painful and overwhelming. To use another bad metaphor, if you take a glacier, which is one thing, and then break it into two things, like, and then you keep going. Eventually you have crushed ice out of a modern refrigerator. But then eventually you keep breaking the complexity down and you arrive back at a single thing again. You're just in an ocean, And I can't remember the term for that flip when you just go from many back to one. And maybe this is like the optimist in me, that we are in this really brutal existential epistemological transition period of when the many has become painful and unsustainable. And we're in some ways, a lot of the utopian hope is that like, if we just, and a lot of the accelerationist hope is like, if we just break it into more pieces, we'll eventually get back to like the oneness. And, you know, I think that was where McLuhan's, some of his more techno-utopian sentiments came from, the idea that like we would eventually reach some level of like global ESP where we wouldn't even need language anymore, where we broke language down far enough. I mean, this is like true, like, you know, if we install enough Neuralinks in our brains, like there's no need for language. Like language is to traverse the distance between me and you. But just say that like McLuhan had that sort of like, okay, we'll get to oneness eventually, which will just be this kind of like global ESP singularity.
I mean, it does feel like, I mean, I guess we were talking a bit before, this relates to this idea of like truth. I mean, there's scientific facts. You can measure something, but generally speaking, truth in the more complex sense is correlated to human scale resolution. So whatever is true at the human scale. And I think what's complicated about this time, I mean, many ways you could think about this. One is that our tools of perception, like if you think about the Enlightenment, the tools of perception, they extended the human scale to a human limit, like a telescope, but you could still relate to a planet in like a human way, or a microscope. You're like, aha, but here's this thing I can see, but I know has like a...
It brings like something to human scale.
Human scale, right. And we're now at a point where with, you know, large machine learning models, it's so beyond a human scale. I mean, even like wealth, right? I mean, that's like a classic one. But like the idea that somebody can be 100 billion, that doesn't make sense. Like,
and that only happened in the past like 15 years.
It correlates actually with the rise of machine learning models. I mean, that scale even being something like we couldn't, the average person cannot conceive of a billion. When you hear the word billion, you think of like crypto dues and Lambos. Like it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't, you can't actually understand the difference between 500 million and a billion.
But also the fact that a billion is 1,000 millions, right? So you think of 1,000 people with $1 million, that's a billion.
Right. Okay,
100 billion, that means that's 100,000 millionaires.
Right.
How can, like...
Right, so that's a better example. We cannot conceive of a billion now, but not 100 billion or 500 billion, or, you know, so when you hear about like Larry Ellison's wealth,
and scale like, falls apart at these levels.
Right. It just dematerializes.
Or understanding of it falls apart.
Totally. So there's this idea that like you're hearing all these different numbers and there's no human referent past a certain point. So we are distinctly different than Enlightenment, because Enlightenment tools like the telescope, like the hot air balloon, like the microscope, they brought things that were outside of human perception to human perception, you know, but now we have tools which are able to perceive scales that are just so completely alien to humans. We don't know how to integrate them. So when we talk about truth, it's really a fiction that talks about truth in relation to human lived experience. But that becomes complicated in a time where you have AI agents that are helping you understand things, because AI agents, quote, quote, understand various different scales that the human can't with their body understand. So when you say complexity, it's also just kind of like talking about scale, like the range of things happening on so many different scales simultaneously. It's no longer within a human range of interaction.
Exceeded the bounds of like the human scale of truth, right? Of understanding.
But then we're given information that says, well, like, you know, and I think some of these effective altruism, they're like, well, the data says though that like it's much better if we do this thing for this many people, even though it risks this many people, you know, being harmed or being, I don't know. I mean, obviously Elon's calculations about like race baiting and calculations about a lot of things have to do with him thinking on some higher level that it's better for humanity.
It's something good to mention, but the other problem is that when you're calculating a probability, you have to freeze the state as it is to do that calculation.
Right.
But everything is dynamic over time and moving. So yeah, it's a frozen state versus a dynamic state.
Right. And I think to that point on our Discord, some people were bringing up Walter Ong's Orality and Literacy, the Technologizing of the World from 1982, kind of as like something to read in parallel with, say, Flusser or McLuhan. And this idea that before we had written language...
Who brought it up? You should probably shout them out.
I think it was Abe1X. A bunch of people were talking about it. But the point that Ong makes is that, I'll just read the quote, an oral culture simply does not deal in such items as geometrical figures. abstract categorization, formally logical reasoning processes, definitions, or even comprehensive descriptions, or articulated self-analysis, all of which derive not simply from thought itself, but from text-form thought. So in oral society, words disappear. So you hear the word, and the words that are most affectively compelling, or the narratives that are most affectively compelling, stay with you. You can't just reference fact. There's no text. It's only when you get to the written word that you start getting the ability for this kind of abstraction. And I think the thing that's confusing is that we both have these written records, but we are returning to some kind of oral society.
Right, because it's this scale, this order up where things, okay, everything is archived, but it's just noise unless the signal is. It's why free speech now is more about distribution than it is your freedom to speak. Right?
Right. I mean, this is totally Byung-Chul Han.
Well, also, all that matters is the distribution.
The distribution of it, right.
Is the signal.
Right.
If you can game the signal within these computational, decentralized, distributed, media systems like social media, if you can game the distribution, you have much freer speech than someone else.
Right.
I mean,
So to just pull it back to Charlie Kirk, and then I'll hand it back over to you, Gideon. So we have sort of two things. One, we have the return of agentic language and magic, the pulling out of certain language and weighting it. And then that's particularly effective in a situation, that spell was cast before Charlie Kirk's assassination. But one of the defining characteristics of this media event is, I think, how totally confusing the information space is. How everyone is at Grok, is this true? And then Grok is just spinning random answers. And I mean, it just feels like it's just such a cesspool of information. And so the clarifying power of witches being able to conjure human scale truths out of this language mess, I think there's something to that. Yeah.
I agree.
Well,
I agree.
The witches killed him, though, right?
The witches
totally killed him.
He said that, and it's and then he died.
No, the witches totally killed him.
Yeah.
No, God, there's so much to say.
If you're hearing this message, you've completed the first step towards becoming a New Models member. To continue, visit patreon.com/newmodels or newmodels.substack.com. A complete library containing hundreds of rare New Models episodes awaits.